Now, more of Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the only show directly addressing the problems and solutions for Illinois. Now, from AM 560, here's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project, on this edition of Illinois Rising. And just picking up on our discussion about the governor's budget address and his tacking, to the center would be generous. I would say it's tacking to the left. It seems to me that he thinks his path to re-election is to be some kind of amalgam of Jim Edgar and Dick Durbin. And we suggested, as we were discussing previously, that this opens up his right flank and he starts to take fire from all directions. Very difficult to win two or multi-front wars even. And that seems to me what Rauner is exposing himself to, believing that somehow he gets reelected in 2018 by, blurring the lines of distinction between him and Chris Kennedy or whoever the Democrat nominee is going to be.
Yeah, one of the things about Rauner that's interesting is social conservatives have put aside some of their high-end issues, abortion and other things.
Although, just on that point, he has another moment of truth coming with House Bill 40, Medicaid funding for abortion, and he's been cagey on where he is on that piece of legislation. If that got to his desk, and that's an if, and if he were to sign that legislation, then it's holy hell.
It would be over, Dan. This is my point, even irrespective of that legislation. The social conservatives and sort of the right grassroots remnants of the conservative movement in the Tea Party in the state in 9 and 10 and that we saw up close, those folks have kind of parked some of their issues because they recognize smartly that the economic circumstances of the state drive so much of what the problems are. And so they took a chance on Rauner. And he is obviously not their friend on these other issues that are non-economic. And I don't think they're going to be as forgiving if he is going to move further and further to the left on the fiscal issues he was supposed to fight for them on. And the fact that he's starting to bleed out of that, he's had a honeymoon with those folks for 2 years, right? And that would come to an end if that were the case. And like I said in the lead-in before we came into this segment, there's not enough votes on the North Shore, Dan, to make up for that. They're just starting. After New Trier, there's going to be even less. There are not enough votes on the North Shore to make up for that, or in these other enclaves. And he's got a real problem there. So
only in Illinois is a fiscal conservative somebody who raises structural taxes. That's what we call a fiscal conservative, or at least that's what Bruce Rauner is trying to pass himself off as, despite his openness to an income tax increase. This was the same guy who said, promised, get the state income tax back down to 3% by the end of my first term. The same guy who said, as a candidate, I'm willing to make the tough decisions, even if it makes me a one-termer. He's been unwilling to make the tough decisions, or he's getting to that point now. He's at least stood his ground up until the budget address, but now he's giving ground. And in point of fact, he may get the second piece of what his willingness because of his failure to do what he said he would do.
Well, right. And the people who run his show helped run Mark Kirk's campaign back in 10. And then, now you saw what happened with Mark Kirk when he stayed along those lines over time. And it's a real problem because as he goes forward asking for vote, these folks are going to get further and further away from him, and they're going to say to themselves, look, if I don't have a choice, and I'm choosing between Chris Kennedy and Chris Kennedy Light, well, then what difference does it make? I'm not going to choose. I'm not going to work. I'm not going to talk to my neighbors. I'm not going to do precinct walking. I'm not going to do any of the stuff that I did in 2014 for this guy because basically he wasn't who he said he was. And those folks, the people on the conservative right especially, when you betray them, that's bad. Well, they can't, rightfully will not take that.
Well, that enthusiasm gap, we know how that plays out. We saw it play out in 2016, where Leslie Munger, the popular comptroller, who did a great job, was a strong candidate. She lost the state by 5 points, where the top of the ticket, of course, Trump lost Illinois by 18 points, so that was a drag. And then Mark Kirk by 14 points. So you want to do a little bit of a test on what happens when there's no enthusiasm for a Republican candidate statewide. Mark Herc lost the state by 9 points more than Leslie Munger. Does Bruce Rauner think he's got a 9-point cushion against any Democrat? No Republican has a 9-point cushion in this climate in Illinois. So that enthusiasm gap or that enthusiasm deficit, if he goes into 2018 with one, by continuing some of the offerings he gave during his budget address, that's the death knell.
Right. And so one of two things is happening. Either he lied to us about who he was and what he believed in, and now he's, coming home to roost, which I don't think is true. I don't think that's
Jonathan,
what it is.
Nice Jeremiah Wright.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like to quote him. Or he's being pushed that way by his advisors that think this is the path to re-election, and this is what these folks do. They're taking his right flank for granted. It happens all the time, and I think it's a gigantic mistake. And I think part of the reason why they're taking his right flank for granted is because they don't understand the right as it relates to them, and maybe even to a certain extent they have a little contempt for it.
Yeah, I understand the staff capture problem, but ultimately that is the responsibility of the principal, and the governor's the principal. He's the chief executive of the state, not his chief of staff or anybody else in his inner circle. And so he's the one that has to make the informed decisions based on advice and counsel. And if he's getting bad advice and counsel, then he needs to expand the circle or change it out. Apparently he doesn't think so. If this is the advice and counsel coming from staff, and I think it is, at least in part. And the bottom line is people are going to have to, especially Republican voters, are going to have to decide, look, did I sign on when I supported Bruce Rauner enthusiastically, when I raised money for him, donated money, walked precincts, all the things that you said that are in the indicia of enthusiasm? Did I sign up for somebody who was going to kind of tinker on the margins and provide a glide path to bankruptcy? Or did I sign up for somebody who was going to bring policy revolution to Springfield, shake up Springfield, his own words? And if he's not willing to bring the revolution, then perhaps he should step aside. If you don't want to fight, then step aside for someone who will, because I'll tell you what, my personal perspective right now, look, I'm part of Tennyson's Light Brigade right now. I understand how the Battle of Balaclava worked out for the English.
You're the only one, by the way.
The brave 600, but I mean, are we going to go down? Really, this is a battle, because and the existential threats facing Illinois, the math apocalypse that is upon us, frankly. Are we going to, go down kneeling and say, well, he's our guy, and so we're just like, my guy, right or wrong, because he's less worse than whatever they're going to offer? Or are we going to pick up something sharp and run into the battlefield, even if our general doesn't want to? That's the choice that's going to confront Republican voters in the very near future, unless Bruce Rauner thinks a second time about what he said this week.